Shalom, shalom. Welcome to my channel, Pedagogical. Thank you very much for being here. Today, we begin a course on the Mishna, that compilation or encyclopedia of the sages of Judaism that has served for almost 2 millennia as the main key to interpreting the Hebrew Bible. Because who could interpret an ancient book without understanding, or at least knowing, its context? If you don't understand the context, you won't understand the text. It's a simple axiom of linguistics and universal history. In this course, we will study and review the entire Mishnah, its 6 volumes, from an academic perspective based on historical facts and the most important research in archaeology, history, and philology by professors from the most important universities in Israel and around the world. But before we begin, a brief introduction to who I am. My name is Abel Flores. I am a journalist, and for more than 20 years I have had an interest in the Bible, the mysteries of humanity, Kabbalah, and Judaism. It's important for you to know that I am not a spiritual authority, nor do I represent any community or religion. I am simply a humble journalist passionate about biblical studies, Judaism and Christianity, the history of humanity, and our Judeo-Christian civilization. In this free course, I invite you to delve into the depths of the Bible as you may never have before. It may scare you, but until you have the courage to dive underwater, you will never know the underwater world, which exists. It's there, even if you can't see it from the shore because you are earthly, because you are an earthling. Like everything in life, it will scare you until you learn to swim, but this was precisely the final teaching Moses left his disciple Joshua in the book that bears his name. Chapter 1, verse 6. Be strong and courageous. Oral tradition says this means, be strong in your studies and courageous in keeping the commandments. I will try, with God's help, to share with you all the knowledge I have acquired while studying in yeshiva or rabbinical schools, as well as my experience, comments, and advice from traveling through the land of Israel on numerous occasions and being passionate about biblical studies from an academic perspective. Before continuing, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with those who seek to understand the world through a different lens. Thank you for being part of this community that is not satisfied with the superficial, the Pedagogical community. With special thanks to my speaker, Abel Flores. Now then, let's get down to business. Imagine if someone with infinitely greater knowledge than you hands you an instruction manual for building a spaceship. But it only includes headlines, verses, and paragraph. It's just text, words, letters, no plans, no steps, no context. It would be a total disaster. Just cryptic phrases like ignite the core or adjust the solar trajectory. How are someone as limited as you and I supposed to do anything with that? How can we follow the laws without instructions, without an example to follow, without seeing someone do it, without explaining the context? That's more or less what it feels like to read the written Torah without the oral Torah. Because yes, there are commandments, many, but without the how, the when, and the why, what we have is a puzzle with missing pieces. And no, it's not because God is bad at explaining, it's just that according to Jewish tradition, that how was always there, just not in writing. So, up to this point, we have the Bible as the written Torah, basically a text without context, a code, words often indecipherable even for those skilled in Hebrew. But on the other hand, we have the oral Torah, the explanation that Moses received. Even earlier biblical figures had this oral tradition that comes from Adam, the first man. But let's say that Moses was that man, a prophet who received the fullness of that oral tradition, the oral law, which completes the written text, the Bible. In terms of biblical exegesis, the Bible is the text, and the oral Torah is the context that gives life to the text. From one point of view, the Bible is a dead letter because it is indecipherable, but its interpretation, which is the oral Torah, gives it life, resurrects it, gives it meaning. The written Torah, the Tannaim, is the body, but the oral Torah is the spirit. In fact, in the misnamed New Testament, and I say misnamed because this collection of writings is nothing more than the Mishna of Jesus' disciples, we find ideas like the following, which perhaps now, understanding the context, you'll be able to better understand. And in this course, in addition to studying sources from traditional Judaism, we also decipher sources from early Christianity, or proto-Christianity, considering it a crucial link in understanding these texts. Let's give a brief example from one of the epistles that has been designated to the Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, as its author. By the way, I'll give you a sneak preview. Saul of Tarsus's teacher, Rambam Gamliel II, is one of the most important figures in the entire Mishnah. This information is in Acts chapter 22, verse 3. Let's read this text in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. He himself has qualified us to be ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. When we talk about training, we are talking about studying. Remember the verse about exerting oneself in study. Studying and training are synonymous. Now, the word spirit in Hebrew is ruach, and it literally means wind. Well, we all know that the voice is wind. The wind of the soul, the Kabbalists would say. In the previous verse in 2 Corinthians, among other things that were happening at that time but are not the objective of this course, it is evident that a text that is not interpreted, put into practice, understood, even understood by not knowing how to read the original language, kills. That is, it bears no fruit, it is dead. Here, we're not really talking about physical death, but rather spiritual death in the world to come. But the spirit, the voice, the oral tradition that gives life to that body, to that dead letter, gives it life, bears fruit. But they're talking about eternal life, life in the world to come. We're not talking here about a new law or Bible. It's the same one, the same manual, but now deciphered in how to fulfill it, put it into practice. Because as Jesus himself said, God is a God of the living, not of the dead. The written Torah, or Torah Shabbatif, is like the prologue to a book that never stops developing. It's the first 5 books attributed to Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Sound familiar? Of course, it's the Pentateuch. The famous core of divine revelation delivered on Mount Sinai, word for word, according to tradition. Everything foundational is there: the creation of the world, the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, the laws of Shabbat, food, relationships, justice. In other words, a manual of civilization. Of course, like any good sacred manual, it comes with the typical style of mysterious instructions that require years of interpretation, because remember, the author of the Torah comes from infinity and is eternal. The redactor was Moses. Please do not confuse the author with the scribe, that is, the redactor. But the Hebrew Bible, or Tannaim, goes much further. It's the complete canon of Jewish scripture. It includes the Torah, yes, but also the prophets, where we find people like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Elijah shouting uncomfortable truths like social media commentators and the writings, which contain everything from heartbreaking poetry like the Psalms to almost apocalyptic novels like Daniel. What's more, the name Tannaim is an acronym. T for Torah, N for Nevi'im, prophets, K for Ketuvim, writings. An entire system categorized with rabbinic obsession. Because if there's one thing Judaism does well, it's studying and classifying, and discussing those classifications. The classifications are the Mishnah, translated as oral teachings, and the discussions are the Gemara. All of this together adds up to the famous Talmud, but the focus of this course is the Mishnah, which, needless to say, are the foundations of Jewish law, or halacha. But don't be confused, the Torah is at the top of the podium. It's the Messiah of sacred texts. The other books, no matter how valuable, have a secondary status. They are studied, read, sung, but they are not venerated like the Torah. In the synagogue, for example, the Sefer Torah is brought out with dancing and kisses. No one does that with the Book of Chronicles, no matter how inspired it is. Much less with the Talmud, or even the Zohar. It's extremely important for you to know that all the sacred books of Judaism are subject to the authority of the Torah of Moses. Now, let's focus on something key. While the written Torah is just 5 books, the complete Tannaim, that is, the Hebrew Bible, is 24. And in those 24, there is history, war, love, poetry, prophecy, exile, reconstruction. An entire spiritual library compressed into the history of a people, Israel. So why so much emphasis on the Torah? Because it represents direct revelation. According to Jewish tradition, God dictated not only the texts, but also the commas, the spaces, and probably even the awkward silences. It's the only text that can be read in synagogue as part of the obligatory service. And yes, you have to read it all, year after year, without skipping a single letter. The prophets, on the other hand, are like that passionate friend who always has a complaint to make. And the writings, well, there's the soul, the emotion, the doubts. Job asking why the righteous suffer. Psalms crying out from the depths of the soul. Ecclesiastes saying that all is vanity. A kind of collective spiritual therapy. And how do we know all this? Because the Talmud, that eternal compendium of Jewish debate, makes it clear in Bava Batra 14v, the order and authorship of the books are listed. Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, details with almost obsessive precision how a Sefer Torah should be written. No invention, no improvisation. The Sifriyai on Deuteronomy, which are midrashim or allegories about the Torah, for its part, reminds us that it's not enough to read, it must be preserved. And the medieval Sephardic Kabbalist Nachmanides concludes by saying that everything in the Torah is pure divine revelation. No filters, no edits, but everything is codified. So, the next time someone uses Torah and Hebrew Bible as synonyms, you know it's not that simple. It's like saying a movie trailer is the same as the entire saga, or that the first chapter of a novel tells you the ending. Spoiler, it doesn't. Understanding the difference between the written Torah and Tannaim is not an academic exercise. It's about understanding how a people have sustained their millennia-old identity, with texts, yes, but also with interpretations, with sacred hierarchies, with rituals that mark what is essential and what complements. And when you understand it, you can't help but marvel, because behind every letter, there are centuries of history, and behind every story, a truth that continues to speak to us, even if it sometimes screams, even if it sometimes whispers. The oral Torah, or Torah Shibiel Peh, is not a footnote or an optional appendix. It is literally the operating system that makes the written Torah's hardware work. Without it, we'd be trying to play chess with Monopoly pieces. Understand this if you know anything about computers. The written Torah is the body, the hardware, and the oral Torah is the program, the software. By the way, I'll give you a sneak peek. Viruses are always in the software, but that's for advanced courses. And here comes something very curious. Although the foundational texts of Judaism are revered for their literality, the Hebrew Bible itself contains clues that reveal there is something more, something unwritten. For example, in Exodus 24 verse 12, God says he will give Moses the tablets, the law, and the commandment. 3 different things. If the tablets are the 10 commandments and the law is the written Torah, what is that additional commandment? Spoiler alert. Traditional rabbis say it's the oral Torah, the same one that so many refuse to accept as part of Revelation. And that's where it gets interesting. Because, of course, one might ask, how reliable can something that was passed down orally for centuries be? Doesn't it become distorted, like a game of telephone? The rabbinic answer is simple and at the same time scandalous. No. Because it was taught rigorously, memorized like national anthems, and lived like a culture, in the body, not just in the mind. Deuteronomy 17 also contributes its own. According to the teaching you are taught, you shall not turn aside to the right or to the left. Whoa! There's no room for selective rebellion here. Whatever the judges and sages of each generation decide is valid, even if it seems illogical to you, even if it's not written in stone. Literally. And if you want something more visual, imagine Rabbi Akiva, one of the most famous sages of the Talmud, extracting laws from the little crowns that adorn some letters of the Torah. Yes, not even from the letters, from the little drawings on the letters. A reading level that makes Da Vinci's conspiracies seem like children's stories. But this isn't a whim. It's a necessity. Because the written Torah says, for example, that one must wear tefillin. But it doesn't say what they are, or that one must remember the Sabbath. But it doesn't say whether it is with wine, with songs, or with religious means. Without the oral Torah, Judaism is not possible. Now, someone might object, if it was so important, why wasn't it written down from the beginning? And why did it decide to write it down? The answer is brutal and brilliant, because writing it down meant freezing it. And the oral Torah allows for unlimited movement, expansion, and deepening. At the beginning of this course, you might think the Bible is the most important thing, but when you dive into the ocean of the Bible, you'll realize that the most important thing is the oral Torah, because it gives life to the Bible, to the Torah. The oral Torah allows for debate. It allows the text to live on in the mouths of the wise, not in the ink on a scroll. Because while written words remain fixed, even lost in time, oral tradition walks with the people. It evolves. It adapts. With the writing of the oral Torah, or part of it, this is something that will be studied in advanced courses, because not everything was actually written in that 2nd century, although more things were written over time. Today we can say that almost all of the oral Torah has been written, more than 90%, but not all. Because remember, the oral Torah comes from infinity. It is eternal. So, with this writing that began in the 2nd century, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Midrashim, and the codified Halacha were born. This whole process lasted centuries, in fact, until the Middle Ages. The oral Torah became texts, but without losing its dialogic soul. It is written, yes, but written to continue being debated, interpreted, reimagined. If you know anything about programming, you will understand this. The written Torah is closed code, and the oral Torah is open code. Therefore, when someone says, I follow only the written Torah, we must ask ourselves, which one? The one that tells you how to do almost anything. It's like saying you follow the Constitution, but without accepting judges, regulatory laws, or jurisprudence. In other words, pure fantasy. Jewish tradition understands that without the oral Torah, there is no possible fulfillment, no viable justice, no living community. Only dead literalism. And if the Jewish people have demonstrated anything, it is that their survival lies not in rigidity, but in the ability to speak, discuss, and reinterpret. In other words, in keeping the voice alive. The voice of Moses, the prophets, the sages, and those who, today, continue to transmit that oral flame that was never extinguished, even though paper has tried to capture it. But everything has a limit. When the persecutions, the expulsions, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE, and the chaos of the diaspora arrived, a drastic decision had to be made to put in writing what should never have been written, because if not, it would have been lost forever. It was a bad decision. From the moment the oral Torah was written, Judaism began to deteriorate, but this bad decision was better than losing everything. Let's put this in the context of the destruction of the Second Temple, which not only signifies the second destruction of the house of the God of the Bible, a God who also doesn't need a house, as his prophets had predicted, but that all this was even worse. It was the Roman genocide against the Jews in the 1st and part of the 2nd centuries. Apocalyptic tribulations of that time.
So, in this context, imagine that few things are written down and that all knowledge, interpretation, and teachings are contained in oral tradition, in the teachings from master to disciple, from father to son. That everything your civilization knows about justice, ritual, family, ethics, and agriculture exists only in the memory of its sages.
And suddenly, those sages begin to disappear. Not because of old age, but because of persecution, executions, wars, or martyrdom. What do? Do you cling to the rule that forbids writing everything down, or do you save what you can, even if it breaks the rules? That was the dilemma that Judaism faced in one of the darkest moments of its history in the 1st century. And the answer was a revolutionary decision, to write the Mishna, the Jewish encyclopedia par excellence after the Bible, of course. To codify what for centuries was sacred precisely because it was oral, infinite, and eternal. Stored in the voice, in memory, in the living repetition between teachers and disciples, parents and children. The oral Torah, that immense body of laws, customs, interpretations, and discussions, was in danger of disappearing. Not for lack of relevance, but for lack of anyone to recount it. Because when the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 by Titus, not only the stones fell, an entire system collapsed, the cult, the central authority, the Sanhedrin, life as we knew it. It is known that the Sanhedrin and the temple were corrupt, Even the Talmud affirms it, but it is also known that, in contrast to all the corruption of the Sadducean priests, there were pious, wise, and righteous people among the people, who suffered just like the corrupt Sadducees under the Roman sword. They all paid together, although not all were sinners. But there was still hope, until the Bar Kokhba rebellion came, and with it, Rome's revenge. Between 132 and 135, Emperor Hadrian turned Judea into a cultural cemetery. He forbade teaching the Torah. He murdered rabbis, among them Rabbi Akiva. Yes, Akiva himself, teacher of the multitudes, symbol of wisdom and resistance. Murdered for teaching the Torah. So what? Stay silent? Let tradition die out like a flame without oxygen? Rabbi Yehuda ha-Nasi, also known as Judah the Prince, said no. He was the leader of the Jewish people in Galilee and president of the Sanhedrin. He was in Galilee because Jews at that time were forbidden to enter Jerusalem, and his Sanhedrin was a new one, nothing like the Sadducee Sanhedrin of the temple that had been destroyed. Yehuda ha-Nasi made an unthinkable decision to write what shouldn't be written. He knew it was wrong, but worse was losing everything. Better to break a rule than to lose everything, he must have thought. And thus was born the Mishnah, these 6 volumes that we will begin studying in the next class, around the year 200 AD. An act of pious disobedience, of orthodox heresy, of necessary betrayal. Because when everything is about to die, orthodoxy becomes a luxury. This movement of Pharisaic rabbis, mostly from the house or school of Hillel, were truly reformers in their time. The Mishnah is not just a book of laws. It is a spiritual architecture. It is organized in 6 orders, like someone designing a complete nervous system for a civilization. 6 scrolls, 6 books, like the 6 days of creation, as if a new world, a new religion, were being created. The 6 volumes are: the first is Zeraim, which deals with agriculture, blessings, and what gives sustenance, because as Moses wrote about manna, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord, God. Notice that it says word that proceeds from the mouth, alluding to the oral Torah, the living Torah. The second tractate is called Mode, the festivals, sacred time, the calendar that reminds you that you are part of something bigger in the universe. The third Tannaim deals with marriage, family, and the bonds that build intimacy. These are also civil laws. The fourth is Nezikim, justice, damages, how you repair what you break. These are penal laws. The fifth is Kodashim, the sacrifices, even though there is no longer a temple, and everything related to the laws of the temple, the Levites, and the priests. And the sixth and last is Taharat, purity, impurity, the interplay between the clean and the profane, the study of spiritual forces, what is unseen. This is the most Kabbalistic treatment of the Mishnah. Each of these 6 commandments is a piece of the puzzle of life, not just of the law, but of the very existence of creation with its creator. The Babylonian Talmud, in Timura 14b, acknowledges this. The oral Torah cannot be written, except when it is urgent. And it was indeed urgent. Maimonides reaffirmed this centuries later. Yehuda ha-Nasi saw that the number of disciples was falling, not because they were converting to another religion. No, it was decreasing because they were being killed. Because at this time there was a genocide against the Jews perhaps worse than that perpetrated by the Nazis in the Holocaust. Yehuda the Prince, who is said to be a descendant of King David's dynasty, decided to act before silence won. Even the Tosefta, a section of commentary to Rashi on the Gemara, admits it. Even the voices that seem to be lost must be preserved. By the way, this is very contrary to what the philologist and historian Antonio Pinheiro wrote about the divisions and disputes among Christians in his book, Los Cristianismos Defeatados, Defeated Christianities, a must-read. Because the Catholic Church did erase much of its own history. In short, the Mishnah is, at its core, an act of resistance, a manifesto of life in the midst of death, a cry against oblivion. It is proof that a civilization can codify its soul without petrifying it, that it can write without becoming a dead letter, that it can change the rules to remain faithful, because there are times when following the law to the letter is to betray its spirit, and there are times when breaking a rule is the only way to save everything. The Mishnah was one of those moments.
If you made it this far, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for staying, for listening, for thinking. If this content resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share it, and become part of this growing critical community. As always, Abel Flores, speaking with gratitude. See you in the next video.